So today, I'm going to reveal to you our very special guest who's actually been a 3-time New York Times bestseller. Not only that, he was in Fast Company's Most Innovative Business People, and most recently covered in the 40 Under 40 in the Fortune magazine. It's none other than Tim Ferriss. Tim, it's great to have you in the studio.
Thanks for having me in.
Yeah, thanks so much for being here.
Oh, I'm ready to tap dance.
I know you
can
are.
answer some questions.
I know you are, and it's unbelievable because today you're here to talk to us about your new book, Tools of Titans. This is literally probably the chunkiest book I've ever seen.
It's good for self-defense.
It is.
It's you could put a handle on it and use it as a kettlebell. Multifunctional.
Wonderful. And it's all about the tactics, routines, and habits of billionaires, icons, and top performers across the world. Tim, I want to kick off. I'm a massive fan of the 4-Hour Workweek.
Thank you.
It's definitely had a big impact on my life. I know it's had an impact on a number of people across the world, millions of people. But for me, when you're writing this book, what inspired it? What got you started writing this book?
So it really started off not as a book at all. I was planning on putting together the notebook to end all notebooks, the Cliff Notes for myself. So I've interviewed, let's call it 200 plus at this point, world-class performers for the Tim Ferriss Show, for the podcast, which recently passed 100 million downloads. It's the first business interview podcast to do that, which is crazy. And I wanted to gather together all of my favorite tactics, routines, morning rituals, favorite books from these guests so that I could refer to them quickly. And I started putting it together. I set aside an entire month to do nothing but that. Took my family to Paris so that I could actually do people watching while having a lot of caffeine and doing it. My mom had never been to Paris, and there are a bunch of reasons. But anyway, when I got about halfway through, I realized this is exactly what all my listeners and all of my fans have been asking me for, is this quick reference to 10,000 plus pages of transcripts. And then all the new stuff, all of the tips that these people, like doctors, biochemists, former Navy SEALs, celebrities like Jamie Foxx, what they've taught me since we had the podcast. So about 40% of it isn't from the podcast at all. It's new stuff from all these guests. And that's how it came about. It was really just to scratch my own itch. I wanted the Cliff Notes so that I could grab a cup of coffee and finish a chapter in, say, 10 minutes and pick up 5 or 10 things I could apply right away. And it's the first book I've enjoyed writing.
Amazing.
And so far, it seems like people are really getting the same response when they read it. So.
Yeah. Incredible. And I identify with that. When I was reading through it, the thing I liked about it is today you see a lot of these clickbait articles that are like the top things you can learn from this person, the top 10 things from this person. Yeah. And they're usually really vague comments. Yeah, so like they meditate and it's like, well, what does that mean? It's like
now what?
They have a good morning routine. Whereas your book really drives into details. Now you said that you see yourself more as a experimenter as opposed to an interviewer.
Yeah.
And you said that you experiment with some of the things you said. What's the strangest thing you experimented with when writing this book and the advice you had?
Oh, there's so many strange things. I mean, I did a 10-day fast, water-only fast, using a number of things like synthetic ketones to make it easier, which is from a doctor, or I should say, he's a doctor, but he's a PhD named Dominic D'Agostino, who's just amazing. So I did, for instance, experiments with fasting, but on the slightly odder side of things, from Mike Birbiglia, who's one of the most successful comedians in the world. He is very good at doing a number of things. He's good at getting celebrities to say odd things, like he tricked, in a way, President Obama into saying poo when he was having a conversation with his wife. That was what he wanted to have happen. And he also had the practice when he noticed that he was putting off writing his screenplay. And this happens to a lot of creatives. He works for himself. He doesn't have an office to clock into. But he wouldn't put off, say, meetings with friends or conference calls. He was always early or always on time. And when he started to do this, sounds so silly, but it actually worked for him, and I've seen it work for me and other people. He took a Post-it note and he put it on his alarm clock next to his bed, and it said, Mike, 3 exclamation points. Mike, you have a meeting with yourself at 7 a.m. tomorrow at Cafe whatever to work on your screenplay. And just by using that Jedi mind trick on himself, became more consistent working on a screenplay. So that's a pretty odd one.
Yeah, that's really odd. I wasn't expecting anything that
super strange. Yeah. And then another one that you might not expect is something that you hear from both monks. So we've talked about this before we started recording. A gentleman named Dandapani, who was a monk for a very long time. When I had a scattered period in my life where I felt really unfocused, he recommended I start making my bed in the morning. As this one thing I could control in a sea of uncertainty, one task I could complete, and come back to at the end of the day and see complete. And it's the same advice that came up with really high-level military. So you would have, say, many people, but one example from a commencement speech actually is Admiral William McRaven. So he ran something called JSOC, basically special operations, during the bin Laden raid. Same advice. Start by making your bed in the morning.
Such a simple
Such
thing.
a tiny little thing. We're not talking Four Seasons. I mean, I'm talking like pull the blanket up just to cover the messy sheets, arrange the pillows so they're symmetrical.
That's it.
That's it. You're done.
That's it. As simple as
Yeah,
that.
yeah. Simple as
Have
that.
you still kept that habit up today?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Still do that
Absolutely.
today.
And what's crazy? So there are a number of people in this book, like Noah Kagan, very successful entrepreneur, and I do the same thing. When I go to hotels, I don't like people touching my stuff, so I'll put Do Not Disturb on for a week at a time. But I will make my own bed in the hotel, and Noah does the same thing. So this is another one of those patterns. Another weird one. I'll give you one more. Is tools that people use to optimize sleep. So there's a device called the Chili Pad, and it allows you with this bedside contraption to put cool water through this tiny sheet under your normal sheet, and you find your ideal sleep temperature. So between 55 degrees and 85 degrees, and it just knocks you out like a tranquilizer dart. That was from Rick Rubin, who's arguably the most legendary music producer of the last 50 years. I mean,
Definitely.
Everyone you could imagine.
You talked about this earlier. You've talked to Jamie Foxx, Reid Hoffman, you've got Casey Neistat in there, you've got Tony Robbins in the book.
Arnold Schwarzenegger wrote
Arnold
the foreword.
Schwarzenegger wrote the foreword. Yeah, I read that, and I was just, I saw it at the end, and I had to flip back over. How did you decide who gets to be in this book? Because they're so diverse.
It's so diverse.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you have hospice care physicians who've helped 1,000+ people die, and then you have the Jamie Foxxes, and then you have the athletes, and everybody in between. Every single guest, and I think this is sort of a key to why the podcast has been so successful, has been really personal for me. So when I have a challenge or an insecurity or a weakness or some grand ambition or a big project, I will try to find the person I think can help me and provide the answers. So if I'm having trouble with, say, being vulnerable, which is a long story, we won't turn it into a therapy session right now, but I'll seek out, say, Dr. Brene Brown, who has one of the most, I think it's top 5 most viewed TED Talks of all time about this, and I'll talk to her. But then I might flip around and talk to Jocko Willink, who's one of the most legendary former Navy SEAL commanders and trainers in the world. I mean, multiple presidents know him on a first name basis.
Yeah.
Jocko, we have Jocko. And he did his first ever public interview with me. And that's for entirely different reasons. In that case, it's like, all right, mental toughness.
Sure.
Schedules that make you stronger. Maybe some type of weight training or developing pain tolerance. So it's very much a personal collection of effectively my life's recipes.
Right.
So that no matter the obstacle I'm facing or the target that I have, I can find something that will make it a little bit easier, a little bit more effective on my path. So that's how I approached it.
I love it. And what's your recommendation to the person out there who doesn't have those names in their black book? Right? We don't start that way. You didn't start that way.
Yeah.
So if you're at the beginning of that journey, you're feeling lost, you feel like you need some insight, and I'm sure as many of our viewers feel like that.
Yeah.
Where do they start? Who do they go to first? You know, you don't have that celebrity reply to their tweet.
Yeah.
You know, you're like Facebook messaging them, and that's not happening.
Well, this is a very important question because not everyone, for instance, wants to be the human guinea pig that I am. So I do all sorts of odd experiments, and I push the extremes and do these crazy OCD things because I want to do the work so other people don't have to. So there are 2 answers to that. The first is going to seem very biased, and it is, but I put together this book so that people who don't have access to all these people can get the Cliff Notes. And it's
Love
like
it.
you just had a private 2-hour conversation with all of these people, and then you have the distilled, fine whiskey result of, say, 2 pages that will make the biggest difference. The second piece of it is, in this book, I pay a lot of attention to questions. So I show the questions I asked. I explain the questions that they like to use, like Jamie Foxx, you mentioned. What's on the other side of fear? He asks his kids this all the time to instill confidence in them. And the answer is nothing. So he helps them to examine fears because you can really get anything you want in life by digging in other people's heads, right? Let's just say you end up in an elevator next to Elon Musk for 5 minutes. Can you make the most of it? Well, it's going to depend on your questions. These are the pickaxes that you use to mine that gold. So I spend a lot of time talking about how to get better at asking questions, which, by the way, you're doing all day with yourself. So it helps you to get better at thinking, helps you to become much clearer. And that is, if I had to point to one thing, the biggest difference between the people who are, say, mediocre or good at something and the people who are the top 1% is the top 1% ask different questions.
Yeah. And that awesome answer. And I know that in the back of the book, you've actually got a great list of questions that you should be asking to people if you bumped into them. And that's the funny thing that I noticed, that when people meet people that they either look up to or admire or respect, they ask for pictures, but they don't ask questions.
Yeah.
And I just look at that and I just think that that kind of sums up what you're talking about, that if you were stuck in an elevator with someone, that you look, ask them a question, like what would you ask them? Or even prepared?
Yeah, exactly. And also play the long game. So you might just plant a seed so that someone remembers you, so that a year or two later, you can have a good conversation with them.
Sure.
And for instance, Mike Birbiglia, the comedian that I mentioned before, he is a celebrity at this point. And the example he used was, if you bump into, say, Jimmy Fallon on the street, you see him on the sidewalk, don't say, hey Jimmy, love the show. He's heard that 1,000 times. It's just gonna go in one ear out the other, or wave, and he's a nice guy. I've met Jimmy before. But the example he gave was, hey Jimmy, do you like kiwi? Fruit. And he's not gonna be able to help himself. He'll have to respond somehow. It's so weird. And he'll probably say, I love kiwi. And now you have that for the rest of your life. You'll be the weirdo who asks him about kiwi, but that is going to stand out. So there are many different ways to approach it. That's kind of a silly example. But for instance, I'll give you one. This is something I learned over time, which is you could ask someone what their favorite books are, but they're just going to pull sort of at random the book that comes to mind that they like. It could be from a long time ago, it could be recent. But if you ask them, what book have you gifted the most to other people, it's going to be a very short list. And they're going to have very concrete answers. And those books apply to more than just themselves. So that, in fact, is a better question. It's more actionable.
Awesome. Vinay says, I love the 4-Hour Work Week. Have you got any advice for young writers? What's the process of getting published? Who can we contact? How does it work?
So getting published is, I think, the easiest piece of the puzzle if you work on the writing craft itself first, and particularly if you're a nonfiction author, at some point building your own audience. And I'll give you an example. Tim Urban of Wait But Why, incredible blog, really well written. And he, through his writing and developing his own style and voice of writing on his blog, has built a sort of an indigenous audience. Once you have that, getting published is quite easy. But I would say that you should study craft. So there are, I would say, maybe 6 best-selling authors at least in this book. So Neil Strauss is one. He's had 8 New York Times best-selling books. And he's also interviewed for Rolling Stone, New York Times. Expert interviewer, so we talk about that. But there are a few things. Number one is he doesn't believe in writer's block. What does that mean? Well, you get writer's block when you have performance anxiety and you set your bar too high. So you're like, all right, I'm going to crank out 1,500 words per day. That's a bad idea. It seems like good that you'll be ambitious. It's actually not good because you'll procrastinate writing. The key to writing is consistency. And so the alternative would be, let's say, 2 crappy pages per day. That's it. All you have to do to have a successful day as a writer is 2 crappy pages per day, even if you never use it. So what happens? Some days you whiff. You have 2 crappy pages, but you're still successful in your own mind. And then other days you might tear out, completely knock it out of the park and do 20 pages. But having that low threshold is actually really, really helpful. And a lot of people have used this. Rick Rubin, I mentioned, he uses this with songwriters who are stuck. Tiny, tiny homework assignments. That's one. There's a good book kind of that treats this called Bird by Bird. And then if you're editing, for instance, Neil Strauss again, he would say, first you edit for yourself to make your writing fun for you. That's it, just fun for you. Next, you edit for your fans. What are the follow-up questions they might ask? What are the things that are unclear? And then number 3, you edit for your haters. So you put on your hater hat and you say, all right, if I wanted to tear him apart, if I wanted to quote him out of context, if I wanted to slam him in a piece, what would I cherry pick? And then he will edit to put on a bulletproof vest and address most of that. So he'll sort of defeat that type of argument before they even have a chance to begin it. So there's a lot of advice related to writing, and most of it applies to creativity in general. But getting published is, in a way, the easiest it's ever been. But breaking through all of the noise and getting attention, even if you are published, that has never been more challenging because the threshold, the barrier to entry is so small. So I would say just get started. And if no one will read what you write on the internet, no one's going to read it when it's printed onto the printed page. So start there.
Yeah, just get started. Now you brought up some themes there that I wanted to dive in that you cover in the book. And you talked a bit about creativity there. We've talked about morning routines or just routines in general. What were the most interesting morning routines that stuck out to you that you think people aren't aware of yet?
Yeah.
And secondly, the ones that we do see patterns in, or that we do normalize, or that we do hear about a lot.
So the first that comes to mind is some type of mindfulness or meditation practice in the mornings. More than 80% of the people I interviewed have it.
It's a huge number.
And it can take a lot of different forms. So for instance, some people use, let's say, a simple app like Headspace. Other people, like Maria Popova of Brain Pickings, one of the most impressive humans I know, she's just amazing, has listened to the same guided meditation for, I want to say, 5 to 10 years.
That's discipline.
It's Tara Brach's Summer 2010 Smile Meditation. It's free. It's about 20 minutes, 25 minutes, and she credits Tara Brach through that with changing her life. And if Maria is a badass, so for her to say that is really impactful. Arnold Schwarzenegger. This is a really odd one, actually. We could talk about this for a long time, given your experience as a monk, but he meditated for 1 year religiously, twice a day, transcendental meditation, and felt like he effectively learned how to do it properly, stopped, and he said that he saw the benefits carry over for decades after that.
Wow.
Yeah, that he no longer took all of these disparate problems, these many different challenges, and saw them as one big challenge or source of stress, which makes it very hard to problem solve. And he carried that mindfulness into, say, doing his workouts. So his form of mindfulness would take that type of appearance. Then you have folks, a lot, and I'm not talking about one or two, we're talking about at least a dozen people who listen to one song on repeat when they're trying to get in the zone.
Sure.
Definitely a form of mindfulness.
Yeah,
You're just,
definitely.
instead of repeating a mantra in your head, you're listening effectively to a mantra with your ears. And it depends on the person, like Alex Honnold, really famous, very famous rock climber, listens to the Last of the Mohicans soundtrack. Then you have people who are listening to, say, electronica, some people listen to jazz, it depends on the person. Some people listen to ambitones, which are just like, boo,
I don't know.
tones, but whatever works for you. So I have a sidebar called Soundtrack of Excellence, where I lay out different options and what people use. That is the most consistent, or one of the most consistent. Morning journaling. There's something called morning pages. It's basically 3 freehand pages where stream of consciousness.
For how long?
And this could take 5 to 10 minutes.
Okay.
Not very long at all. And Brian Koppelman, really, really successful screenwriter, also co-creator. I mean, he's done The Illusionist, he's done Rounders, he's done tons with his writing partner. Also co-creator of Billions on Showtime. Huge hit right now. And he credits morning pages with a lot of it. And he's recommended it to maybe 100 people, and as usual, only 10 tried it. Of those 10, though, he said that I want to say 7 have had multiple hit TV shows, multiple screenplays sold, multiple movies made, multiple best-selling books. So there seems to be something to it. Those are 2 that come to mind,
they stand
but
out.
there are dozens. And you just pick and choose. That's the key. For every pattern, let's say you find a lot of people who wake up at 4:30 in the morning. There are those people in the world. I'm not one of them. But then you'll find someone like BJ Novak, who's best known from The Office, but incredible writer, incredible producer also, among other things. And he has to kick around and like read the paper and kind of BS like I do until maybe 11 a.m. to get his motor running. And that's totally fine. So for every pattern, there's always 1 or 2 who do exactly the opposite.
Yes.
And that's very liberating because you can pick and choose and find your toolkit.
And how many people of the people you spoke to said that their morning ritual was waking up, looking at their mobile phone, and going through their emails and going through
there
social
were
media?
a few people who actually were very forthcoming because I give all of my guests Final Cut. This is a very helpful trick. If you want people to be raw and very open, I say, hey, you have Final Cut. We can take out anything you want to take out afterwards. And so one that comes to mind, and there are more. There are probably at least a half a dozen, but Sam Harris, PhD in neuroscience, one of the most brilliant people I've ever met. Incredible, incredible writer and thinker. He speaks in finished prose. I don't know how anyone does it. He's just incredibly smart. And he said, well, and I'm paraphrasing, of course, but he said, I'd love to give you the picture of a well-oiled machine and this incredible morning routine, but really it's someone stumbling out of bed in search of caffeine who may or may not have checked their email before they got out of bed. And that's okay. Because in every case, and this is one of the main points I want to drive home with this book, and what I want people to realize is that these superheroes and the icons we tend to put on a pedestal, on the magazine covers and everything, and we think of them as unattainable because like, oh my God, well maybe so-and-so can do it, but I can't do it because he or she is so-and-so. They're all, maybe again, with the exception of like a few alien species who are just total outliers, but most of them are hugely imperfect creatures who have tons of weaknesses and insecurities, who are battling their own demons, but they figured out how to build habits around one or two core strengths.
Yes.
That's it.
Going all in on those.
That's it. Yeah, they all have weaknesses. So despite that, Sam is one of the most prolific, intelligent writers I've ever encountered.
Right.
And he's really built an incredible career and
Yes.
life for himself. That's important, which is why the book is broken into healthy, wealthy, wise.
Yes.
That wise is really key. Achievement is not enough. Being good at targeting goals and knocking those down, not enough. If you want to feel fulfilled and content, there's a whole other side to that you need to focus on.
This gave us a perfect shift actually into, you were talking about icons, talking about people on the front of magazines, talking about flaws. We're actually going to shift over to our titles and tools game here.
All right.
That we've themed specifically for your book. So I'm going to take Tim over here. And bear in mind, he didn't create this game. We created it for him because we love the title of the book so much. We even brought in someone carried that all the way from Queens, right? So just to add it to the feel. Now, the task that we're giving Tim here, and I'm going to ask him to walk us through this as well, is all of the celebs. So we have President-elect Donald Trump, we've got Taylor Swift, we've got Kanye West, we've got the media, right? Any institution, and we've got Apple. We could have had a lot more. And we're going to ask Tim which of these titans need which of these tools. So we've got fear setting. Now you use that term in the book.
I did.
Right? Mindful measure, so mindfulness, meditation. Shake up, someone who just needs to be grabbed and shaken up. Honesty, someone who needs more honesty in their life, someone who needs a little more learning. The humility hammer, who needs a bit of humility in their life. And the simplicity source, someone that needs to simplify, strip away. Yep. Now we're only asking you to do one per person, so I'm going to start off with President-elect, unless there's another one you want to go for.
No, we can start there, sure.
So what do you recommend for President-elect? Which tool?
Well, I should say, probably above my pay grade in all of these cases, so I know none of these people personally, but so for President-elect, I would go for simplicity, honestly. Very good, very astute businessman, of course. Moving into the let me try that again. English. The gigantic bureaucracy, which is the US government.
Yes.
I think that hopefully bringing some of what he's developed in the commercial world and applying simplicity to government and cutting out the fat and so on will be critically important. I just can't see how it wouldn't be.
Nice. Okay.
And I think if there's any hope of both sides of the aisle working together, looking for common ground and simplicity whenever possible will be really, really important. Okay, so Taylor Swift.
Yeah, Taylor Swift.
Taylor Swift.
That was good. That was
so
good.
I'm going to apply learning level to Taylor Swift.
Okay.
And I'm applying that not for Taylor, but for me because I don't know anything about Taylor Swift. And I remember it was a few years ago, and someone said Taylor Swift. I said, "Who's Taylor Swift?" And they go, "You got to be kidding me! Really? Like, what hole do you live in?" I would like to know more about her, so I need to learn.
This is our
more
reminder
about Taylor
to you
Swift.
again.
So, Taylor, call me. Kanye. All right. So this is, I'm again stabbing in the dark a little bit here. I'm going to use mindful measure.
Yes. Nice.
And I think that applies to everybody. And we talked about mindfulness. I think mindful is really just training yourself and conditioning, and you can do this through a lot of different ways, to be less emotionally reactive and more aware of your own thoughts. That's it. I think that's a good working definition. So a story about Kanye, which is actually in Tools of Titans.
Yes.
And I think this came up in conversation with Chris Sacca, good friend, billionaire, incredible investor. And he heard this story about Kanye, and I don't remember the other party involved, but this comedian commentator went to Kanye's house, and they're friends. And in Kanye's living room, there's a huge, I want to say, photograph or mural of Kanye in his own living room. And this commentator asked him, "Kanye, why do you have a huge mural of yourself in your own house?"
Yes.
And it was something to the effect of, "Well, I have to cheer for myself first.
Wow.
If I want anybody else to."
Yeah.
And Chris, who's in a totally different game, was like, there's actually a really smart logic to that.
Yeah.
So I think he's a very smart guy, but sometimes he might speak before he's processed the thought, and that can bite him. So
hence the mindful.
I would say mindful measure, which we all need.
Yes.
So I'll use that. But
Nice.
I do think he's a lot smarter than people give him credit for.
Awesome.
The media, this is easy, right here.
Yeah.
Honesty.
Honesty.
So
Fake news.
Oh my God, it's worse than fake news.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what's worse than fake news. The most terrifying thing in my mind right now is the slow self-immolation related to First Amendment. So you have very credible, intelligent people being disinvited from speaking on college campuses because they might present an uncomfortable viewpoint to a handful of students on campus. Are you kidding me? It's just the creation of an infant nation, and they expect to be handled with kid gloves, and then you get into the real world, and you don't have to deal with microaggression in the real world, it's macroaggression. So if you want to make tough problem solvers, you need honesty. So the media, I think, has to start talking about what everyone is thinking and not saying for fear of repercussions. I really think, if you look at, say, Fahrenheit 451, okay, who burned the books? Well, people say, oh, is this tyrannical government? No, that's not how it started. The people started burning the books because they didn't want to offend any small minority group. And then before you know it, there's no freedom of speech. Everyone has basically suffocated themselves. That is terrifying to me. So honesty, hard hat.
Yeah,
You need
I'm
more,
with you.
more people willing to face the fire, because that's the only way that we're going to improve things. And by the way, no important conversation, or I should say no important topic, is ever going to be handled with a comfortable conversation. They're all uncomfortable. So
Unbelievable. Yeah.
we need this and we need this.
Nice.
And then for
Finally, Apple.
you know, I'm going to go with, we could do
Shake Up Shovel.
We could do Shake Up Shovel. And we could do
Okay.
Fear
They
Setting.
get two.
So, and the reason they get two is these are related. So,
Let me do
Apple is, damn these analog thumbtacks. So I know a lot of friends who work at Apple. I'm a huge fan of the company, and I think at least last time I checked, most profitable
love the brand.
company on the planet. And what I think every large company has to do, and this is also something people should do, and this has been recommended in Tools of Titans by Mark Andreessen, another billionaire, also incredible technologist, recommended by General Stanley McChrystal, retired four-star general, and many others, and that is red teaming. So what's the concept of red teaming is, you take the scrappiest, most averse to authority 20-somethings in your company, for instance, and you say, all right, you 5 people, your job is to take down Apple. How would you do it?
How would you do it?
Here's some resources. And that comes from military, where the red team would be in the Cold War of the Soviet Union, the US blue. So you take 5 people within your group to try to attack your idea, attack your defenses, whatever it might be. And fear setting, similarly, I think is just identifying the risks and really putting them under a microscope. And this is an exercise, fear setting, that I think is more important than goal setting. And I go into all sorts of detail in the book, and I don't want to bore everybody. But I'd say these 2 for Apple, great company, good products. I want to see them around for a while, so here we go.
Absolutely amazing. Give him a massive round of virtual applause. Grab your seat, Tim. We just let me have a look at all the love flying across. I mean, that was absolutely brilliant. Loved how we were able to extrapolate so much stuff from the book.
Yeah.
Just through this crazy exercise.
Working on it.
Here's so many ideas, but it's true. You're documenting, you're recording all this, and you can see that you've totally internalized it. And I want to get that across to everyone. And you said you wrote the book. Tools of Titans is for people to have that time that they couldn't have had before. They couldn't have sat down with these people. But how did they switch from reading it to turn it into implementation, execution? Because obviously you've seen this challenge for years.
Sure.
Right? What's stopping them?
I have. So there are a few things. And we talked about a little bit earlier, me being an experimenter and not just an interviewer. So everything in here has been vetted, meaning I've actually been able to use it. And friends have been able to use it. In some cases, thousands of my readers have been able to use these things. So these are all reliable, number one. They actually work. So they give you a very fast, positive feedback loop, if that makes sense. But there are 2 things. So one that surprised me is just by reading these, you absorb a lot through osmosis, and you will change how you think. There's no way around it, and I think that is partially because it's very question-rich. So those questions will travel with you. I was surprised by that, because I use pro and con lists. I use schedules. I use all of these spreadsheets to track stuff. I didn't need all of that for a lot of the changes that were most profound for me. The second is, if you are going to sort of put a few things down as your to-do list, only choose 1 or 2. Don't try to do 20 things at once, people. And I could give lots of examples, but just choose one. So for instance, if we're talking about Amelia Boone, who's the world's most successful obstacle course racer, 3-time world's toughest mudder champion, also works a full-time job at Apple as a power attorney, just an incredible athlete and tough woman. So number one, what would you put on a billboard? No one owes you anything. I just had to throw that in because it's my favorite.
Yeah.
And then, but on top of that, she's introduced me to, say, the Rumble Roller, which is this device that you guys can look up, but it's incredible for helping with tight muscles and injuries and so on. So if that is it, just go on the Amelia Boone diet and do 1 or 2 things that she recommends for a week.
Absolutely.
That's it. Don't try to do 20. 1 or 2 things, keep it simple. And over time, 52 weeks in the year, I mean, your whole life is different if you've adopted 1 or 2 new behaviors or tools each week.
Tim, is there anything you feel you haven't been able to communicate today? You've got like 30 seconds to squeeze in 140 characters of whatever you'd like to share.
Sure, I'll keep it short. This is actually, I'll share, no matter what you do, if you get the book or not, one of the best responses to what would you put on a billboard, gigantic billboard, a few words to get out to millions of people, if you could, was from B.J. Miller, this doctor I mentioned, who's helped 1,000+ people through the process of death. And he said, don't believe everything you think. Don't believe everything you think. We all have a lot of self-handicapping limitations that are not real. These are stories we've told ourselves. So challenge those assumptions. And hopefully, if you read the book, some of the tools will help.
Awesome. Thanks so much, guys. Thank you so much. And we'll see you very, very soon. Massive thanks to Tim again.
Yeah.
And look forward to having him back in the future.
I would
Thanks,
love
guys.
to do it.